Okay, so norepinephrine, right? Norepinephrine is also a classical neurotransmitter identified first, right, or early. It's also a monoamine. It's made from an amino acid. It has one monoamine group. It's also a catecholamine, right? So just like dopamine, it is made from the same amino acid, which is called tyrosine, which is distinguished by a very distinctive ring structure called the catechol ring, which you find in both dopamine and norepinephrine, both of the catecholamines. In addition, actually, norepinephrine is actually made from dopamine. So in neurons that are dopaminergic, right, they express those genes for those first two enzymes that grab the tyrosine, convert it into L-DOPA, grab the L-DOPA and convert it into dopamine. But the norepinephrine releasing neurons just express one additional enzyme that's known that's actually will produce an enzyme that's called dopamine beta hydroxylase, or DBH, which will grab the dopamine and synthesize norepinephrine. So basically, dopamine is the precursor to the synthesis of norepinephrine. I should mention, by the way, dopamine and norepinephrine and serotonin, we're going to see. All three of the monoamines, actually, they're synthesized by these, specific enzymes that are expressed, in these individual cells. They are packaged into vesicles. Interestingly, they are packaged into vesicles by what's called a monoamine transporter, vesicular transporter. So dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin are actually packaged by the same structure. It's a monoamine transporter. It does not care if it encounters, dopamine or norepinephrine or serotonin on the vesicle. It's a monoamine vesicular transporter. It'll take any of them in. This is a good example of conservation here, because in a dopaminergic neuron, it's going to express a monoamine vesicular transporter, but the only thing it's synthesizing, it only has the first two enzymes for synthesis, right? Is going to be dopamine. So it's dopamine that'll get packaged in as the primary neurotransmitter in those dopaminergic cells. But in the norepinephrine releasing neuron, that monoamine vesicular transporter, once the synthesis of norepinephrine is complete, it's going to package in, specifically norepinephrine, basically into the vesicles, because that's what's being generated, because there's a third synthesizing enzyme. This dopamine beta hydroxylase is being expressed in the norepinephrine releasing neurons. Norepinephrine has an abbreviation. It's NE, but you'll also see NA, and the reason is terminological and complex. So this is, shows you that, science is a human pursuit, and there are individuals and, different cultures involved. So it turns out that in the United Kingdom, and in much of Europe, actually, they tend to talk about noradrenaline. What's interesting is if you have a cell, like cells, for example, in your adrenal glands, which sit atop your kidneys, they'll express, the two enzymes that take tyrosine and generate dopamine. They'll express this third enzyme that'll take the dopamine and generate norepinephrine, but they'll also express a fourth enzyme, a gene for a fourth enzyme, which will grab the norepinephrine and turn it into what Americans tend to call, what scientists in the United States tend to call epinephrine, but which people in the United States tend to call adrenaline. So in the United States, we tend often in these, in the designation of these, transmitters and hormones, we say that norepinephrine, one more enzymatic step will take it to epinephrine, and epinephrine is released from the adrenal glands and is part of the fight or flight and HPA stress response. But in the United Kingdom, they're a little more consistent. They'll actually say, dopamine is converted into the neurotransmitter noradrenaline. That's the same thing as norepinephrine, but noradrenaline. And then adrenaline in the adrenal glands is one more enzyme expressed that'll take the noradrenaline and convert it into adrenaline, which is released, as a hormone into the bloodstream. So I apologize. One more terminological issue that's related to this is that all, the scientists in Europe and the United States, whatever, like all over the place, they tend to say that neurons that release norepinephrine, right, or noradrenaline, because they're the same, as their primary neurotransmitter, they're referred to as noradrenergic neurons. So they go with the noradrenaline side. So don't get confused, although it's confusing. Norepinephrine is the same thing as noradrenaline. There's just two ways of referring to that. And if there's another enzymatic step, as there is in the adrenal glands, and the norepinephrine is converted to epinephrine or adrenaline, because epinephrine and adrenaline are the same thing, that's also going to be confusing. But it is, how these things are referred to, and again shows you how science is made up of human endeavors, right? So in terms of the source of norepinephrine or noradrenaline release in the central nervous system, it's also a brainstem source. So this sort of is a shared structural aspect of its shared functional modulatory role in arousal, right? And norepinephrine or noradrenaline is actually really interesting. The noradrenergic neurons, they're clustered in this nucleus in the brainstem that's known as the locus ceruleus, and that means the blue spot, right, or the blue locus, like a cerulean sky or at a blue sky. And they stain blue. They can be stained blue very selectively. And there aren't that many neurons that are noradrenergic. It's kind of remarkable. They carry out a very critical sort of arousal function, an orienting kind of function. But there's only about 5,000, in a brain of 86 billion neurons, about 5,000, noradrenergic neurons in the locus ceruleus on the left and 5,000 on the right in the brainstem. They project, however, quite widely, and their influence is pretty exceptional because when their axon leaves here, it turns out there are these swellings all along the axon. So you have here's the cell body in the locus ceruleus in the brainstem. Here goes the axon, and then it swells. Then a little bit more axon, then it swells. Then a little more axon, then it swells. And at each of those swellings, you find vesicles that have monoamine vesicular transporters, right? That are packing, the vesicles with norepinephrine or noradrenaline. And you have the docking complex, and you have voltage-gated calcium channels. So you have all the synaptic release machinery, along the axon, along the way. This is called an en passant synapse. And so these 5,000 noradrenergic neurons in each locus ceruleus in the brainstem actually make many, 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 many synaptic connections all around the brain. And when they are stimulated, like this, oh, that wasn't really loud. If it were suddenly very loud, it's like a soaker hose. They fire off, and they release norepinephrine all over the brain, and that generates what we call a startle response. And it involves sort of orienting to external, novelty or something unusual or something unexpected. So, norepinephrine is really important behaviorally for sort of alertness. It increases heart rate. It allows you to, deploy networks more effectively to external, circumstances. So it helps with cognition, and it tends to improve people's mood as well. And again, the neurons are projecting, these noradrenergic cells are localized in the locus ceruleus, the blue spot in the brainstem, and they'll be set off by something unexpected, unusual, something that you'll orient to kind of externally, as a result.